board. And I'm going to take a screenshot. So at the count of three, everyone smile and wave or whatever it is you want to do. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. What we are going to get started, and what I'd like to do is give each of us the opportunity to introduce ourselves and say what co-op we're from and how many co-op owners we have. And I'll get us started just real quickly because we have some relatively new faces here, to me at least. So I want to welcome you all. This is Coffee with Katie, which is a monthly co-op networking and educational event that I do for free for cooperators across the United States. I was very fortunate in my cooperative career to have lots of people share lots of information with me. And in the spirit of cooperative principle number 6, co-ops helping co-ops, I do this session once a month to kind of share what I've learned and help answer questions for folks who are doing the work that I love to do, which is outreach and growth and capital campaign planning. So let's get started. I'm just going to start at the top of my screen with you, Lois. You're the first one. If you'll tell me your name, your co-op, and your owner number.
Lois Bendix with Free Range Food Co-op up in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And we just hit 997 owners.
Oh, you're almost at 1,000.
We went so fast that we can't even really monopolize on the turning 1,000 because I think it's 996, but there's an application out. And I know that I will get that back and that'll bring us to 997. So
that's exciting. That's a good problem to have. Congratulations. Okay, Susan, you're next.
Susan Moss from the Bay City Food Cooperative in Bay City, Michigan. And we have 253 members now.
Awesome. Jess?
Sorry, trouble with finding my mute button. I'm with Prairie Food Co-op in Lombard, Illinois, near Chicago. We have 1,655 owners. And I also work with Katie on Co-app.
That's a lot of owners, Jess. That's awesome. Okay, Peggy.
Good morning. I'm Peggy Keating from Suncoast Market Co-op in Imperial Beach, California. We're just over 900 owners, approaching 920, I believe. Nice. And starting our search for a GM and in lease negotiations for a site. So
very exciting, very exciting. Peggy, I was hoping I'd get to see some of you guys while I was in California recently, but it didn't work out. I'm sorry about that, but you guys are doing great work. I will, I promise.
Thanks.
Okay, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Hardiker. I'm in with the Hillsboro Food Co-op here in Oregon, and we are at 849.
Fantastic. Roberta?
Hi, I'm also with the Hillsboro Food Co-op, like Jennifer says, 849, and in Hillsboro, Oregon.
Awesome. Welcome. Chris?
Chris, Butte Food Co-op, is that who you're talking about?
Oh, we have 2 Chris's. Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Butte. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean I see another Chris there.
No problem. No problem. You go ahead. You go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. Sorry about that, Chris. Chris Ekerskowski with the Butte Food Co-op. We are a stage 2A, late stage 2A co-op in Butte, Montana. We are at 851 member owners.
Awesome. Awesome. Chris number 2.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually saved from the fact that I had my mic muted there anyway. So Chris Corbin at the Oshkosh Food Co-op in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. We are, as of just checking with my board president, 1,900 right now, and I am member 1538 of that 1,900.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see your faces, and doing this kind of session is always inspirational and inspiring to me. So I'm really, really glad you're here. Today, we are talking about volunteer management, and I am going to share my screen with you. And now I have to rearrange my. Hold on 1 second here. Let's get back. Okay, here we go. Okay, so volunteer management. I like to think about volunteer management, and I want today's session to be pretty informal and involved. So if you have comments or thoughts or questions, please feel free to chime in, raise your hand, put something in the chat. I will try to keep an eye on that. But my my philosophy when it comes to volunteer management is very similar to my philosophy when it relates to any kind of management, any kind of people management, and that's to treat people with dignity and respect. And if we follow those pretty basic practices, we should have volunteers. We should have volunteers flocking to us. You would think, we would hope. But I would like to start by talking about the fact that managing a volunteer is very similar to managing or hiring an employee. And I like to think about them in very, very similar ways. So anyone here on the call with us today have managed people? So raise your hand or put a thumbs up in the chat if you've been in charge of people in a supervisory role of some sort. I see a couple yeses there. Folks who are chiming in, yes. And how about somebody who would be willing to share with us an example of a boss that you've had that has been really good? So we know there's some of us on the call who have managed people, but we've all been in a position where we've had a boss. And I'd like you to share for us what made your favorite boss your favorite boss. What was really great about them? Yes, Roberta.
So the boss that I had while working for a Parks and Rec district, she was actually the volunteer coordinator. And I worked with her coordinating other volunteers for this district. And what was really cool about her was not taking herself too seriously, being very grounded, always accessible, even though she was so busy all the time, just checking in and following through on the things that she said she would do.
Awesome. Those are really important. Anyone else have examples they would like to share?
Sure, this is Chrissy. At my previous boss, I worked for a cancer advocacy nonprofit, and he gave me guardrails, but he didn't really put me in a box. So he let me have some autonomy while allowing me to learn, but then also gave me a little bit of guidance. So sort of that he really was able to balance out sort of the autonomy with helping me learn and grow as a manager.
Oh yeah, that's really important. That is very important. Thank you for sharing that. Really, when we're managing volunteers, it's very similar to when we're managed by a boss or when we're managing an employee, so to speak. And what we're going to talk about today really is generally speaking some guidelines and suggestions as it relates to volunteer management. But as your co-op changes and grows over time, those needs will change. And clearly there are different expectations and activities and recruitment necessary for a board member or a tabling volunteer, all very different tasks. So what we're talking about today here really is generalities in terms of volunteer management. Let's talk about how the action of managing volunteers is very similar to the action of managing and hiring employees. When you're hiring someone, if you were a boss or a manager, which some of us have indicated that we are, we know that we have to look at our needs. We have to see what do we need this person to do, and then describe what we need them to do. What does that look like literally? And then let people know that this opportunity exists. Then you got to find the right person, get them on board, make sure they're trained. And then we have to evaluate them and recognize them along the way. So I'm going to dive into each of these subjects just a little more detail. Assessing your needs. So when you're thinking about your volunteer needs at your co-op, you want to think about where you need assistance. And when I was serving as an outreach manager at a co-op and really throughout my career, I like to keep a running list of areas where we need assistance. So you may be in a meeting and somebody says, oh gosh, I really wish we had somebody to do X, Y, and Z. Or if we only had this person, this kind of person, we could do this. So I keep a list of that, a running list of what we need and what kind of skill sets are we lacking in the co-op that we're looking for, and quantifying those needs. How many people is that? Is it one person? Is it 2 people? Is it 10 people? And what's on the horizon for us? What's coming up next? What do we need to be preparing for? What kind of volunteer roles could we have to help us be more prepared when the time comes? And then looking at other co-ops, what are they doing? What kind of volunteer roles do they have, and how they're managing their volunteers is a really good process. Now, once you've answered those questions and you have a good idea of what your needs are, the next step is to write it out. I advocate for volunteer job descriptions, and I just call them job descriptions, but sometimes that's confusing to people, but specifically spelling out each and every role and what that means for the individual. I like to include reporting information. So does this volunteer report to a committee? Do they report to the board? Do they work independently? What exactly their responsibilities are, spelling out step by step what they'd be doing, and what's the time commitment involved. And I like to spell that out on a weekly or monthly basis. So this is a 10-hour a week commitment or a 10-hour a month commitment, whatever the time restraints or time commitments might be. I like to spell that out. And if there are meeting dates and times applicable to that volunteer role. So if they're joining a committee, it's a good idea to include when that committee meets, how they meet, if it's virtual or online or in person. And then looking at the location, where does this take place? And something, it looks like there is some gibberish at the bottom of the screen there. So you can disregard that. And once we've written the job description, once we know what we need and what it looks like, we need to tell people about it. We need to share the opportunities. I advocate for a page on your website with volunteer opportunities where you can have these job descriptions posted and people can see exactly what you need. You can also utilize an online interest form where people can submit their name and information and indicate what areas within the co-op they're interested in volunteering. You can post these roles on your social media, in your newsletters. And I would advocate that you share these things, you share these opportunities wherever the co-op is. So at tabling events that you're at, if you're at the farmer's market, or as Lois was just talking about the fair, if you have a co-op booth at the fair, for example, you should have information about your volunteer opportunities available at those tabling events. Your board meetings and your annual meetings are a great place to talk about the volunteer opportunities that you have available. Then you have to select the right person. So you've assessed your needs, you know what you need, you've written this description of the roles that your co-op needs to fill. Now you have to find the people to fill them. We're going to talk about recruiting a little bit later in the presentation, but for right now, when you have somebody who's interested in filling one of these roles, it's really important that you get to know the individual. I advocate for a one-on-one conversation with each and every person interested in volunteering at the co-op. I know that sounds like a big undertaking and like it would be a burden and time consuming, but it really does pay off. It allows you to get to know them. It allows them to get to know the co-op. And then you can share all this great information that you've just put together, your job descriptions, your time commitments, all of that stuff. You look very prepared, and these potential volunteers will be very impressed that this organization knows what they're doing and they have all their ducks in a row. But you want to tell them about yourself and find common ground with them, tell them about the co-op and ask where they see themselves fitting in, and then plug them in. Once you know you've got the right fit, getting them connected to the right people within the co-op is a really important step in the process. So you've got the person selected, they're in the right committee. Now you have to get them onboarded. And onboarding and training, in my opinion, kind of go hand in hand. onboarding to me gets the person acclimated with our organization. Co-ops to many volunteers are foreign. They like us. They became an owner. They know what we are, but they don't know much more than that surface level information. So sharing some information with them about the history of co-ops, generally speaking, how long they've been operating, where they come from, why they originated, and then specifically the history of our co-op, how long we have been operating, who originated the co-op, what's our co-op story, what's our progression, our timeline, how does the co-op evolve moving forward. I also like to share the mission and vision of the co-op with individual volunteers when I'm meeting with them to get them on board. And then going through some FAQ with them, I think is a really good idea, because volunteers will encounter questions from the public. And so we want them to be prepared to answer those questions. So preparing them by going over that FAQ with them or giving them access to it, pointing them to it so they have reference points is really important. And then to set expectations with them. And when I'm working with a volunteer, I have very simple expectations that I like to share with them. And those expectations are to show up. If you say you're going to show up, that you show up. And if you don't show up, I call you. So I set that expectation very clearly. So if someone's supposed to be there at 9 o'clock and it's 9:15 and they haven't arrived yet, I let them know that I'm going to call and check in, make sure they didn't have a flat tire or that something, kids didn't get sick or something happened. So I let them know that when they make that commitment that I'll be following up with them. I also expect volunteers to communicate with us. If we've set a good foundation, if we've had a good meeting and we've gotten to know each other, hopefully that volunteer feels like they can tell us what's working and what's not working. And we ask them to be honest with us, because if the volunteer is not happy, the co-op is not happy. We're not happy. So it's important that they share with us what is working for them. And then if there are meetings, that they attend those meetings. If meetings are part of their volunteer role, that they show up to those meetings as expected, and then they follow through. They do what they say they're going to do. So training then is the second piece of that kind of onboarding puzzle. Training then gets more into the details of what that specific volunteer will be doing, and it's tailored specifically to their role. So for example, a volunteer who's helping with QuickBooks is going to need very different training than a volunteer who's tabling. And so you really want to make sure that you're giving them the training that fits the work that they'll be doing. Sharing an organizational chart with them, how committees are structured, who is on the board, names and phone numbers and contact information for board members is important to share at this point, as well as a committee charter. If they're part of a charter, they have access to that committee charter, and then contact information for other members of the committee, including that chairperson of that committee, and then system access. So they have to be able to access the things that they need to get their work done. So another quick conversation piece here. I wanted to ask for anyone, if anyone would be interested in sharing an example of a volunteer opportunity that you've had, like as a volunteer, where you felt like once you got there, it wasn't working out the way you thought it would. Maybe you didn't feel utilized or you're kind of overwhelmed. Has anyone ever had that experience? Anyone? Jess, has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, it has. I think there's been situations where I feel like I could have done more, but other people felt like it was their responsibility and that I shouldn't help out because maybe we didn't see eye to eye on it.
Gotcha. Anyone else have an experience where they showed up to a volunteer event and maybe weren't as utilized as they had hoped they would be?
Yeah, I think sometimes that's the disorganization of the group, right? And they haven't planned for how they're going to use their volunteers. So you find yourself standing around.
Yes. And there's nothing, to me, there's nothing more frustrating than standing around doing nothing. It's very frustrating to me, especially if I'm volunteering. I want to be helpful and have an impact. In fact, it's frustrating for me to be doing that anytime. I have to work on that. I'm not so comfortable doing nothing. But I think, Chrissy, you had another example.
Yeah, I've been asked to help set up for events and not knowing like who is the lead person to talk to. It's been really hard, or there's not having a point person to like be like, okay, you need to do this. And then you're just sort of like, I don't really know what to do. And I agree, standing around is probably the worst thing when you see volunteers just sort of sitting there being like, okay, I could be doing other things. So
Right. Yes. And Peggy, yes.
Or working with the person who has to do it all. It has plenty of help there, but not willing to take the time out to tell her volunteers what she needs help with, but yet she's running around like a crazy lady.
Yeah.
Not great.
Right. All of these are lessons for us, right? Because we can do so much. We're stronger together. We can do so much more when we're together. And by taking the time to have these conversations with volunteers, to get them trained, to get them onboarded, to get them comfortable and acclimated, by investing that time up front, pays dividends in the end. Because if I've done that as a volunteer manager, so to speak, and Peggy, you show up to an event with Chrissy and Jennifer, and I've had this conversation with the three of you, you guys should be able to hit the ground running, and we don't have to spend a lot of time sitting around twiddling our thumbs and feeling unuseful or frustrated. So it is really, really, really important. Let's get back to the slides here real quick. Okay, so we've talked about the need for training and making sure that individual volunteers have specialized training, tailored to exactly what they're doing. I just want to look at my notes here and make sure I haven't forgotten anything I wanted to tell you. Okay, so once we got the folks trained, they're effective, they're hopefully working within the guardrails, Chrissy, that we've given them, and they feel like they're having an impact in the organization. We have to continue our work with them. And why won't my slides? Oh, here we go. Progress. We have to continue our work with these volunteers by evaluating their work and recognizing what they're doing. So when I'm evaluating a volunteer, I do so, as I've mentioned numerous times so far today, that from the very same perspective as if I were managing an employee. It's very important that as an employee, I need to know what my boss thinks. Am I doing what I should be? Am I meeting expectations? Volunteers need that very same feedback. They need to know if they're meeting your expectations or if they're not meeting your expectations. And using very specific examples, I find, is really helpful when we're working with volunteers. And understanding the volunteers' preferences is also really important when we're talking about evaluation and recognition, especially when we're talking about recognition. If you know a volunteer is very private and quite introverted, let's say, for example, they may not be comfortable with a big, huge social media post talking about how awesome they are as a volunteer. So understanding the volunteer and their preferences really is important. And it should be very timely. When someone does something good, we should tell them about it now. When they do something that's not so good, we need to tell them about it now. I have an example from my days back in corporate America. In one of my last, before I left corporate America, one of my last performance evaluations, my boss shared with me a situation that he thought I could have handled differently, but it occurred 9 months ago. It had occurred 9 months previous to this conversation. And so there was very little I could do to correct the problem. And I felt frustrating to me. And I thought, well, gosh, I've had 9 months of opportunities to change that. And I didn't know that needed to be addressed. So having those conversations timely is very important. It's also really important, if we have to provide some constructive feedback, that we do so in a way that the individual can receive it well and feels good about it. And I like to use the sandwich technique, which is a traditional communication tactic where you start with something positive, you you insert the constructive feedback, and then you end with something positive. And typically when you're having these kinds of conversations, volunteers are pretty receptive. They can figure out if they've done something right or wrong, or they know if something, could have gone better. And they can usually, correct it and get on board really quickly. And I do like to keep these things casual. This is a volunteer setting. We are not, as I like to say, we're not in heart surgery here, and nobody's doing heart surgery. And so we need to keep it casual, lighthearted, and keep it fun for the individual. Let's see, there was something else. I was going to say about that, but I can't remember what it was. So we'll move on and talk about recruitment. So volunteer recruitment is really critical to our success as a co-op. It takes hundreds of volunteers, thousands of hours to open a co-op, and recruiting volunteers really is a critical piece of the puzzle. So some things I've seen work really well in terms of recruiting volunteers are working with organizations that you're already personally associated with. So religious or spiritual organizations, hobbies that you have, book clubs, knitting groups, professional organizations that you might be a part of. These are already groups where you as an individual have a reputation and a standing. And so that you're respected and valued in those organizations. And when you introduce them to a new organization, that weight carries, and they will be receptive, hopefully be receptive, and be a source of additional volunteers for you. Other symbiotic organizations are also a great place to look for volunteers. Environmental groups, ecology action groups, any kind of recycling, composting, gardening kinds of organizations. Those are the people doing the kinds of work that resonates with the work that we're doing. And likely those can be very good volunteers for us. Farmers Association, young farmer groups, farmers market attendees. Those are people who are doing this work as well, and introducing them to the co-op and inviting them to the opportunity to volunteer is a really good opportunity, or is a really good example. And unions as well. I have found unions to be a great source of support for co-ops. They're very mission aligned, and I say that as in true transparency, as I come from a very union family, and find that unions have been very supportive and a good source of volunteers and funding for that matter. And creating those relationships with them now makes funding a little easier, makes the funding conversation easier if they've been volunteering and participating with your organization all along. And Chris, I see you have your hand raised. Did you have a comment?
Yes, I've got a question actually. Have you ever experienced doing sort of formal asset mapping exercises, trying to get a lot of people in the room to take care of both maybe some of the recruitment and then funneling people into specific roles in maybe one sort of swoop? Now, I mean, obviously you'd probably want to recruit in other places too, but has that something you've seen used before or used effectively?
I haven't seen that take place much in the cooperative world. I have seen it take place, more in a corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
But I do absolutely think that practice is applicable, and it could be some great foundational work in terms of mapping out needs and where you might have resources or gaps in resources.
Great.
Yeah, great question. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? Yes, Susan.
Have you ever worked at all with veterans groups?
Oh,
Like
no.
We have a lot of veterans around here. It seems like.
Absolutely. I think a veterans group is a great group. I have worked with retired volunteers. There's a retired seniors volunteer program in my hometown that had great success working with them. Solar businesses, in fact, often were a great resource for us. Any kinds of transportation organizations also, like bike advocacy groups or public transportation advocates, almost always would align with our mission and our work and would help with event sponsorships or those kinds of activities. Does anyone else have examples of organizations where you have symbiotic organizations where you have been able to source volunteers for your co-op? Okay, well, let's finish up. I think that might be our last slide, or maybe we have one more. Yes, one more slide. Let's get back to the slides here quick. Recognition is a big part of keeping volunteers excited and engaged in our work. And I think recognition is a critical piece of the puzzle. People who feel appreciated, I included a quote at the bottom of the screen, which I really like, that people who feel appreciated will always do more than expected. I know that applies to me personally. And I think that statement applies to many people, that if they feel appreciated, they're willing to go a little further, try a little harder. If you feel underutilized, you show up at an event and there's nothing for you to do, you probably aren't going to volunteer next time. But if you showed up and you had a great experience and you felt like you really made an impact and you felt appreciated, you're probably going to volunteer again, and maybe you'll volunteer more than you had anticipated before. One practice I like to recommend when considering volunteer recognition is to use a volunteer intake questionnaire. So when somebody decides that they'd like to be a volunteer, you've had a conversation with them and they have a role, you have a spot for them, I send them an intake questionnaire, and it can be a simple Google form, and it's just basic contact information. And this is a good safety practice as well. I like to ask for an emergency contact name and number, just in case anything would happen, while the volunteer was volunteering with us, flat tire or anything like that we would need to get in touch with someone else in their household. That's generally a good safety practice. But in terms of recognition, I like to ask them their favorite food, their favorite color, their favorite restaurant, their favorite snack. And that way, when it comes time to recognize them, if they've gone above and beyond and they've done a really great job, and that they have told me that XYZ coffee shop is their favorite coffee shop, I can stop and pick them up a coffee the next time I meet with them. Or I could get them a gift card to the coffee shop as a small thank you for their involvement with the co-op. Or if their favorite color is green, I write the thank you note on a green card. So, kind of a nod to their preferences. I like to start every meeting that I have with volunteer recognition. So if we're having a committee meeting, I thank the volunteers or thank someone specifically for their work, the work that's transpired recently. If Roberta and I were meeting on an outreach committee meeting and she had recently managed a table for us, I would thank her in front of the group for doing that and start the meeting off on a positive note. Sending a personal email to volunteers to thank them, I think, is really a powerful tool, a very simple, easy way to make people feel appreciated. In addition, a handwritten card is even better. And it's even better yet if you can pass it around a board meeting and have the board members sign it. So, if I were recognizing Roberta for that event, I might take a card to the next board meeting and have the board member sitting at the table sign that before I stick it in the mail and mail it to her. And that really does go a long way in making people feel appreciated. Highlighting volunteers in social media and in your email newsletter is a really simple, easy, cheap way to help volunteers feel appreciated. Again, you want to make sure that you know their preferences, and that volunteer intake questionnaire can help you with that. You can ask about their preferences, if they're okay with public recognition or if they prefer private recognition. And providing continuing education opportunities for volunteers can be a really great way to recognize committed, strong volunteers. For example, sending them to the Up and Coming conference every year, or attending another volunteer community ed offering in your community. If a local community college or foundation often has half day or day-long seminars about a topic related to the work we're doing, offering to send that individual and have that paid for by the co-op can be a really great way to make them feel recognized. Giving them the scoop is a really, really interesting way to help keep your volunteers recognized and engaged. And what I mean by that is there's a lot happening at the co-op. And we get so ingrained in the work that we're doing that we either think everyone knows how much work we're doing or what's happening, or that they were not going to find value in it. This is boring. We were just in a meeting. It was boring. They don't care about that, but they do care. They want to know. And if we can tell our volunteers just a little more information about what's happening behind the scenes at the co-op, it really helps them feel connected. An example of this might be, if the co-op has a big announcement, let's say the announcement's happening tomorrow. Well, today, if I were having a committee meeting, of course, I would get the board's permission to do so. I might have at that committee meeting, I might have a conversation with the committee and say, hey, FYI, we've got some big news coming out tomorrow. And if you guys will keep this confidential, I'm going to share it with you today and give you a little bit of a heads up. And it helps them feel really connected and interested and excited about what's happening at the co-op, and doesn't have to jeopardize any kind of confidentiality or security or anything like that. But it's a really neat way to I have found it very successful in keeping people interested and engaged, and knowing that, hey, by doing this work, I get to find out about things a little bit ahead of schedule. And that feels good to me. And showing them respect. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, treating volunteers with dignity and respect, just like you would treat employees with dignity and respect, or you would want your boss to treat you with dignity and respect, really and truly is what pays off and what will make volunteers come back. And as we talked about at the beginning of our session, volunteer coordinators who aren't taking themselves seriously, who are grounded, who are realistic, and who give us guardrails, really make us feel like we can be successful and we're making contributions. And so keeping in mind some of these logistical practices as we're managing volunteers can really pay dividends moving forward. So that's the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to ask questions and continue the conversation if others have ideas or thoughts or questions.
Katie, I have a question, which is just around, with 849 members, like why do we not have more volunteers? So my question is about energizing the member owner base rather than going to outside organizations to try to find volunteers. How can we, tap into why aren't they replying to our calls for help?
Oh, goodness gracious. If only we could answer that question, Jennifer, right? But some tips I would say in that regard would be to make one-on-one asks. It's very easy to ignore an email that says we need volunteers for X, Y, and Z. But if you call up Jess and ask her if she'll do X, Y, and Z, it's a lot harder for Jess to say no when you're asking her directly. So that's one way. Generally speaking, making things look fun. And I don't necessarily mean making them look fun, but making them fun. When you have a group of volunteers together, put some crazy hats on, take a picture, or, make a post of everybody doing crazy things, like make it look like this is something I want to do. These are people I want to hang out with. This is fun. Can help really kind of turn the tide, so to speak. But a third thing I'll mention in that regard, Jennifer, is that sometimes we need fresh blood. Sometimes we need a new perspective. We need another organization, someone from another organization, or someone with experience from another organization to come in and say, hey, have we tried it like this? What if we do this? But I see what you're saying. It'd be nice if of these 900 people, at least 10 of them would do something.
Mhm.
Yes, Susan.
I know this would take some time, but it seems like it might be a good thing to research your member base, maybe spread that out amongst some volunteers, like on LinkedIn or something, just to find out what people are good at. And then it's easier to approach them and say, oh, I see you have this great background in finance, and we could really use some help in that way. Your skills would be so appreciated. And
Yeah.
or if or have the board look through your list and say, some people on this list, what
Yep.
they're good at. Why don't you reach out to them because you know them and they know you, and you can put on a little flattery and
Yes,
or
absolutely.
compliments.
Susan. Yeah. That's a great tactic. I highly recommend that. And that's going to pay dividends when it comes to your capital campaign too, because you'll know more about these people, professions, those kinds of things. Jess, Chris has his hand raised, and then I'll come to you.
Katie, one thing that you said in the presentation sort of linked up with something that resonates from sort of church world with volunteer work, which is, I think being able to find one of the areas we've been failing is not having those specific descriptions and sort of trying to funnel people into their positions. But I think then one way to help really encourage more people once you have that specificity is to always draw those particular tasks back to the mission. That's something that gets brought up in church stuff a lot. Often because we don't have missions that we need to have in churches, but being able to say, doing this particular task is not important because we just need
do
things
it,
to do, but because it furthers the mission in this very specific way.
Absolutely.
And because people want to be a part of something that is meaningful, not just
They don't
doing
want to
work
cross
to
a
do
box.
it.
Yeah, check a box. You're right. Absolutely. Good point. Yes, Jess.
Just building on what Susan said, I have we have a Prairie Food Co-op LinkedIn account, and I uploaded our owner list to that. And it automatically sent everyone who matched up with either the phone number or the email address, and sends them an invite to become your friend, which can be annoying for some folks because it's pretty persistent. It all happens automatically behind the scenes. But once you do that, whether or not they decide to be your friend, you can connect with them pretty easily and see that these are people in your contact book and what their professions are. So I spent, when our owner list was like 1,200, I spent probably a 2-week period of volunteer time just copying, pasting professions into our CRM. And that was really helpful in the campaign because I could reach out to skill sets and say, hey, this is what we're doing. I'd either ask for advice and hope to get participants, or I'd invite them to like a group meeting and say, hey, I want to bring together 5 marketing people to pitch this idea. And that was pretty well received.
Yeah, that's awesome. Roberta, do you have a comment or question? I think maybe Roberta might be frozen. Rosa, are you frozen, Roberta? I think so. Okay, does anyone else have oh, wait. Oh, I think we lost her. We lost the connection. Yeah, Lois. Oh, you're on mute.
Jess, I'm not very familiar with LinkedIn. I mean, I've been on there a few times, but can you be a little more specific about how you did that?
I had all of our owners in a spreadsheet with their name and their phone numbers and their email. And then when you go to LinkedIn, you can import a spreadsheet into your contact book.
Okay.
Okay. Roberta, did you want to try to chime in? Oh, maybe she's frozen again. Oh, maybe not. Okay, we'll go to Chris. Chris, you have another comment or question?
Hi, so this is for,
Shoot, Roberta, I
Maybe
wonder
Roberta-
maybe if we could have you put it in the chat. We're not hearing you. Okay, looks like we lost her again. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, what do you have any sort of additions to this advice or modifications of the advice for dealing with burnt out, burned, or otherwise needing to reestablish relationship with volunteers or a volunteer base that was once really active? I mean, I think this also might apply to co-ops as they move into different stages. And you
Yes.
like, this is something we're seeing. We had a lot of really active volunteers in the startup stage, and now
Yeah.
that we're sort of operating and just sort of going along as an open food co-op, I think we have a lot of people who didn't realize that there would still need to be volunteer work.
Yeah,
To say nothing if some of the volunteer cultivation wasn't always there as well as it could have been. But
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great comment. Great question. I think that's an issue we all face. And one I faced very specifically in my role at Green Top Grocery. I did not recognize the burnout of a committee until it was too late, and unfortunately had to repair some of those relationships. So I feel this one pretty strongly. What I would recommend is that we build practices into our work to reduce that burnout, so that, you know, when we're having conversations with folks, when we're setting expectations with them, we're letting them know, hey, we want you to have a life. You know, we want you to have normalcy. We don't want this to become, too much for you. I want you to tell us when it gets to that point. So setting those expectations up front is something we can do to help eliminate or reduce the problem. Once the problem happens, my go-to is always a conversation, just have a sit down, a very solemn, serious conversation with the individual and take responsibility. I find that also works really well when we have to coach someone. So in a negative situation where maybe something wasn't handled the way it should have been handled, taking responsibility for that mistake off of the individual often helps them absorb it. And in a volunteer role, you can do that. I can say to Jennifer, hey, Jennifer, you didn't fill this form out right. We got to do it this way. And then I say, I probably forgot to tell you to do that part. It's my bad. I'm sorry about that. Now you know how to fill the form out right. We can kind of take that same approach when we have a burnout situation or maybe a disgruntled volunteer, to say, hey, we probably didn't do what we needed to do to make sure that you were in a good place. And I apologize for that. I take responsibility for that. What could we do differently this time? And I might even not go the route of recruiting them, so to speak, asking them to be engaged again, but to ask for their advice. So if we were having someone do this role again in the future, what could I do differently? Or what could the co-op do differently to help make the situation a little better for you, a little easier for you? Doing that then gives them the opportunity to share what they'd like to see differently, but it also welcomes them back. Like, oh, well, I don't want someone else to do it. I want to do it. You know, I still want to participate. I just needed X, Y, and Z from you instead of, A, B, and C. So a conversation, I think, is a good step in that direction. And I'll think a little bit more about it too, Chris, because I think there's probably some more that could happen there. Does anyone else have thoughts on that? Or if you handled a situation similarly, a similar situation? Yeah, Susan.
Haven't handled a ssimilar situation, but I suppose if you kind of interview people just as things go on, like, how's everything going? Does anything need to change, to make everything work better? Maybe it could be like proactive, preventing burnout before it happens. So instead of waiting until it happens.
I agree. I agree. I think having ongoing conversations, how things are going, how you feeling, checking in, knowing your volunteers, knowing who their family is, knowing how many kids they have, knowing where they work, knowing what their favorite things to do are, and checking in with them, knowing that their mom's sick, knowing that their cat, had the flu last week or whatever. Really knowing them really goes a long way. Yeah, agreed. Roberta, are you there? Were you able to communicate the way
I
you
put
wanted
my
to?
question in the chat.
Oh,
It's for Peggy.
Okay.
Yeah. I follow you guys, and it just seems like you guys really have some secret sauce as far as community and owner engagement. And I'm wondering if you can tell me what you think is the magic.
Boy, I wish I knew. We'd have gotten lucky. You mean in the respect of volunteers?
Yeah, volunteers and just like excitement over what you guys are doing down there. You've got great response.
Our board is pretty amazing, I have to say. We have 8 people that, just really take seriously what a working board is. Sometimes I think we do too much and don't allow our volunteers to do enough, just like we talked about earlier. But we do make it fun. We have an awesome social media person who is also on the board that, really engages people. We have a lot of events. Well, we're starting to have more events, that kind of was lulled for a while. So our events are fun. We do recognize people. We have, at our events, we give away stuff, that gets them there. We're out all the time. We're out on, tables. We have a kind of a beach. We are in a beach city, and there's a street that everybody walks down. Every Saturday, we're out there with the table. We've recently just started a monthly farmers market because our farmers market went away during COVID, and now the co-op has sponsored a farmers market, and that is just bringing tons and tons of people out. We've just had our 3rd one, and we have over 50 vendors and a waiting list. So, yeah, it just spreads. We take a lot of pictures. We have a table last Saturday when we had our farmers market. I think we got 13 owners, just
Wow.
for being there. But, we take their picture, we ring a big cowbell, we get people to notice us.
Yes. I love the idea of ringing the bell when you get a new owner. That's fun. And that could work in the store too. When someone becomes an owner in the store, you ring a bell or the intercom or something. That'd be
We just
cool.
want a store.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Susan.
Any ideas about attracting younger people?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I think utilizing platforms that young people are using is a good technique there. And I am guilty of not doing such a thing. I'm not on Instagram or TikTok or anything like that. But I think co-ops that are utilizing those platforms are really seeing a younger engaged crowd. And then making a direct ask to someone of the demographic that you're looking for. And I think this goes across the board in terms of demographics. I didn't do as good enough job as I wish I could have in recruiting a diverse set of volunteers when I was recruiting volunteers. I would have liked to have done better at that. And I think by seeking out an individual that can serve as kind of a leader of that group, if you get a young volunteer who's really influential in your community to get involved with the co-op, they can bring that energy and recruit their friends. The same goes with, a member of the Hispanic community or someone who speaks another language, a volunteer who speaks another language that you need on your team. And I wish I had done a better job of making those direct asks to join the group and join our efforts. And I think that probably would have paid dividends and been good for the co-op. It's better for all of us. The more diverse our volunteers are, the more diverse our organization will be. what other questions or thoughts do you have? One thought I had as we were talking is something I didn't utilize, but as we were having our conversation here, it dawned on me that a regular volunteer survey could be helpful. That all volunteers in the co-op get a survey once a year or once a quarter, that we could get some general feedback. How's it going? Do you feel appreciated? Do you like the work you're doing? Do you feel like you're useful? That could be a really great tool. And I don't know why I never thought about it till now, but I'm glad we had our conversation. So now I have. And that could be a simple Google form as well. And the thing I like about Google Forms is it keeps everything in one spot. So when you go back to check, everything's in the same spot, in the same place.
That's a good idea.
And it's good for the board too. I think it's good for the board to check in and evaluate how we're feeling, how we're doing. And I will preface, how are we doing on time? Yeah, we're at time. So the last thing I'll say really is that volunteer management is just like human management, people management in a for-profit kind of experience. But it's also very important that we're taking care of ourselves and taking care of our volunteers. So we've talked about volunteer recognition and making sure they feel appreciated, but it's really important that we feel taken care of. And sometimes that means putting boundaries in place for ourselves. And so as Chris mentioned, burnout can happen. We get overwhelmed. There is a lot of work to do when we're opening a store or running an open grocery store. And we sometimes take the responsibility on and it can be heavy and it can be a lot, but it's really important for us to take care of ourselves just as we're taking care of our volunteers. So please remember that. I hate to hear when folks get burned out and they feel disgruntled about the co-op, and I want everyone to have, this is valuable, meaningful work. And I want you to feel valued and meaning, and that you add meaning to the organization. So make sure that you're taking time for yourself, just as you take time to recognize your volunteers. Any last minute questions or comments? Okay, well, I've recorded today's session, so I'll send it out to you. Feel free to share it with others within your co-op who weren't able to attend if it would be helpful to them. And you're welcome to send me other comments or questions as needed. Jennifer, did you have something?
No, just saying bye.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.